Obviously, this is a big number here. Talk to us about where this money is going and why you think it's best being redirected.
Thank you so much, Emily. It's wonderful to be with you. So the first thing that I would say is that for over 30 years, Cisco has been a big believer in supporting the communities around the globe. This is something that has been incredibly important to us. It has shaped the way we show up, the way we train students around the globe. So the approach that we've taken is really to focus in 4 key areas. And you're right, we started first with COVID, and then we started to look at how we can leverage these funds to also address racism. So what we're doing is first we're looking at those that are most vulnerable. The second thing that we're doing, which I think is very close to our culture and what we care about, is we're looking at family and communities. We're then looking at resilience and research and how we can play a bigger role. There's some amazing opportunities from an IoT perspective as well. And then lastly, we're looking at really the strategic imperative and those initiatives that can make a difference. And so our dollars have really been spent in these 4 key areas. And then what you heard about 2 weeks ago was we decided to take a bigger stand as it relates to racism. And so we've given dollars to the EJI, NAACP, Color of Change, and many other organizations that we think can play a significant role. And as you would imagine, we're having a lot of the conversations and taking actions internally as well.
Let's talk about those conversations, because for decades, companies didn't necessarily take a stand on social issues. And I know that's something that Cisco increasingly has decided that, you know, the company has to take a stand to have these conversations internally. How do you internally draw the line between work and politics, work and social issues, or are they increasingly simply intertwined?
Yeah, it's such a great question and a good point. So what's so interesting is that we decided that we had to have this conversation, and there was a stat that was shared recently that basically said that the workplace is where we experience difference. 70% of people say that they don't experience difference in their home or personal lives, but they do in the workplace. And so I think it's all the more reason for us to truly lean into it, because I think this is where we're going to make significant progress and difference. It is true that once upon a time, this was seen as something that you didn't talk about in the workplace. But I think the realization that we've had is that if we don't, we're not going to see the change that's required. And so after hearing about the very sad murder of George Floyd, what we did was we called an employee meeting. We invited Brian Stevenson from the Equal Justice Initiative and Darren Walker, and we just had this conversation where we were educating our teams. We were sharing our perspective, how we were going to show up. And Emily, something that I think is so important is that we shouldn't bring politics into racism. That is something that should actually just not be considered a political issue, and we're doing our best to navigate that with our employees.
Now, Fran, these are really sizable commitments that you're making. Despite that, you know, we've been having a lot of conversations about this on our show with folks in the African-American community. One investor, Arlen Hamilton, told us, well, these commitments in general are nice, but they also ring kind of hollow. You know, why is it only when companies are, you know, sort of pushed into a corner, or when the Black Lives Matter movement sort of rises up, that companies are just doing this now? It's something that they should have been doing all along. What is your response to that?
I think that's incredibly fair. When I think about some of the comments and the great messages that I see multiple companies putting out there, I think what employees are looking for is, are we living this internally? And I think the power is when employees feel like their companies are committed to change and they see these significant differences and improvements in the community. I think that's where you actually start to find momentum. For us at Cisco, it's interesting. The first week of January, Chuck actually gathered us in his home with about 20 of our African-American leaders. And we spent about 3 hours, Emily, just listening to their experiences at Cisco. And from that, we learned a lot. It was incredibly moving. But what we knew more than anything else was that we had to take action. And so we created at that point a 100-day sprint. And the results from that sprint were that we achieved 110% of our university hiring goal. We always do pay parity runs, but we did another one with incredible focus. For the first time, we did a promotion parity review as well, which was powerful. And then we set goals around listening up and down the company to truly understand. And the nice thing about that is when our employees understand that we've been doing that work and they see this commitment, it just feels real.
Now, Cisco has committed, and I know we've heard this from Chuck, that you won't be laying off people in the midst of this pandemic. Is that a promise that you can continue to keep now, knowing that we're officially in a recession, the uncertainty will continue, and we don't know how long this economic, social, and health crisis is going to continue?
You know, I think Chuck was very clear at the beginning of the pandemic that we were going to do every single thing in our power to prevent putting our employees out into the job market. And that's something that we care a lot about. It's something that we're going to work incredibly hard to do. It's funny, my team at the moment, we're getting really creative about ideas on how to reduce some of the costs, how to navigate through potentially a recession. And we're going to do our best to stay in this mode and continue to make at the same time the right calls for the business.